There's a moment right after you clear the credentialing desk, right after the lanyard goes around your neck and the doors to the Javits floor open, where the noise hits you before anything else does. Engine noise, or rather, the memory of it, built into the design of every car in the room, sitting still, waiting to be looked at. Now, I've been to auto shows as a fan, but this year I went as press. Same show, but a completely different experience. That's what today is about. Welcome to Throttle Culture, where we go deep on the machines, the people, and the culture that makes this world worth obsessing over. I'm Jay. This is a feature episode, so no guest, just me, the floor, and what I actually saw at the 2026 New York Auto Show. Cars, concepts, brand activations, and one or two things that made me stop and think harder than I expected. So let's get into it. Press Day is not the auto show the public sees. The cars are the same, the booths are the same, but the energy is completely different. And that difference changes everything about how you interact with what's there. There's no crowd between you and the car. You can actually stand next to a hood line and look along it, which is how cars are meant to be seen, by the way, not from 6 feet back with a phone over someone's shoulder. You can get close enough to read the panel gaps. You can crouch down and look at a rocker panel. You can hear what the brand reps actually say about a car when they're talking to someone they know, taking notes, versus what they say during a public weekend when they're managing traffic flow. It's the difference between being shown something and being trusted with something. And I want to take you through the floor the way I actually walked it. Not just the hero cars, but also the activations, the concepts, the trucks, and the choices brands made about how to show up this year. Because all of that tells you something. Now, I want to start with Volkswagen because their booth was one of the most talked about on the floor, not entirely for car reasons. Volkswagen leaned hard into their FIFA World Cup 2026 sponsorship. Full activation, branding, screens, interactive moments, and the whole infrastructure of a sports marketing campaign dropped inside of a car show. And I have genuinely mixed feelings about it that I want to be honest about. On one hand, it's smart. The World Cup is coming to the United States this summer. Matches are being played in New Jersey, and Volkswagen knows exactly who walks the Javits floor. A huge portion of the auto show audience is the same demographic that's going to be watching those games. Connecting the brand to that moment is not a dumb move. It's a calculated one. But on the other hand, I'm at a car show, and there were moments walking through that booth where I had to remind myself what I was there to look at. The activation was loud in a way that competed with the cars rather than framed them. When your sponsorship activation becomes more visible than your product, something in the balance is a little off. And here's the thing, because there were cars in that booth worth actually talking about. Tucked in, almost like it didn't want to make a fuss, was a Jetta GLI in red with a 6-speed manual. And I stopped. I genuinely stopped because in a room full of concepts and activations and screens telling you what to feel, here was this thing just sitting there being exactly what it is. A hot sedan, a real gearbox, a color that means it, no apologies. That car did more for me than everything around it combined. The GLI has always been the honest version of the VW performance story, and in red with 3 pedals, it makes that argument better than any activation budget ever could. Then there was the new Golf R, and look, I wanted to love it. The Golf R has a real history. It's earned genuine respect in the enthusiast world over multiple generations, and I came to that car ready to be impressed. But standing in front of it, something didn't land for me. The updates felt incremental in a way that the car's legacy doesn't really allow for. You can't be a legend and then show up with refinements. The R faithful will tell you the numbers are better, the dynamics are sharper, and they're probably right. But presence is not the same as performance. And on a show floor where presence is the whole game, the new Golf R read quiet when it needed to read loud. For me, the GLI 10 feet away was the more exciting car, and that's not a sentence I expected to say walking into that booth. What I will say about VW broadly is this: they know how to build something that works and works consistently for a long time. That's not a small thing, but at a show where you're asking someone to feel something in a physical space, I wanted more cars and less campaign. The GLI made me feel something. The activation and honestly the R didn't quite get there. Now let me tell you about the car that stopped me cold on that floor. No, it wasn't a supercar and it wasn't the GT3 RS. It was the Genesis G90 Wingback Concept. And if that surprises you, it surprised me too. And I was standing right in front of it. Some context first, because this car has a story worth telling. Genesis originally revealed the Wingback back in December 2025 at Le Castellet in France, and at their 10th anniversary event. And most people assumed that was it. A beautiful show car, a statement of intent, and then silence. But it showed up at New York anyway. And the fact that they brought it to a second major show specifically to North America tells you something about how serious they are about this thing actually happening. What it is, technically, is the G90 flagship sedan platform, completely unmodified, same 126-inch wheelbase, same 200 plus inches of overall length, but with the trunk replaced by an extended roofline and a full tailgate. This is one of those Wagon Wednesday worthy wagons. Try saying that 10 times fast. Genesis calls it a shooting brake rather than a wagon, and standing next to it, that distinction makes sense. The rear is raked, not boxy. There are dual spoilers. There's a diffuser. Flared arches over 22-inch wheels. Aerodynamic canards on the front fascia. Blacked out grille with Magma badging throughout. This is not a practical family hauler that someone stretched and called performance. This is a grand tourer that happens to have a roof that keeps going. The interior is where it got me. Dark chamood, a suede-like material covering the seats, the dash, the console, all of it quilted. Green contrast stitching running through everything, including the steering wheel and the embroidered Magma logos. It's the same green as the exterior, and the effect is that the car feels like a single unified decision rather than an exterior and an interior designed separately and then matched. That coherence is harder to achieve than it looks, and most brands at this price point don't pull it off this cleanly. Now, powertrain. Genesis hasn't confirmed numbers, but here's what we know. The standard G90 runs a twin-turbo V6, making up to 409 horsepower in its supercharged configuration. The Wingback is badged Magma, which is Genesis' performance sub-brand, the same program that just produced the GV60 Magma at 641 horsepower. There are reports of a V8-powered GV70 Magma on the way, pushing 600 horsepower. If the Wingback goes to production under the Magma umbrella, you're not talking about a fast wagon. You're talking about something that goes directly at the Audi RS6 Avant, the BMW M5 Touring, the Mercedes AMG E63, cars that have held a cult following in this country for years precisely because nobody else was willing to build them. Genesis would be the first Korean manufacturer to step into that conversation, and based on what was on that floor, they'd be stepping in with something that looks the part completely. Genesis's creative chief officer said it plainly at the show. A limited production run would be no problem, and the conversation from sedan to wagon is executable very fast with minimal expense. That's not concept car language. That's a man telling you the decision has essentially already been made and they're waiting for the right moment to confirm it. What I kept thinking about standing next to this car was what it means for Genesis as a brand. There's a version of Genesis that's very good at building luxury cars that don't quite close the sale. Cars that everyone acknowledges are well made, but that don't create the kind of want that converts a browser into a buyer. The wingback, if it goes into production, is a different kind of product. It's the car that makes someone walk into a Genesis showroom who was never going to walk into a Genesis showroom. That's what a halo car is actually for. And this one has the proportions, the interior quality, and the performance pedigree to do exactly that job. This feels less like a concept and more like an announcement they weren't quite ready to make yet. Alright, so Ford brought the Spirit of America Mustang, and if you know the heritage of that name, you know why it lands differently than a standard special edition announcement. The original Spirit of America was a show car from the early 60s. It was part of Ford's effort to position the Mustang as something beyond transportation, as a symbol. The name carries that. It's not subtle and it's not trying to be. Standing next to this car, what I felt most was intention. Ford made a decision with this one. The finish, the details, the choice to invoke that specific lineage at this specific moment, right before a World Cup on American soil, right when American car culture is trying to figure out what it wants to be in an era of electrification. It reads as a statement. We're still here. This still means something. And then you find out this thing is being put forward as a Le Mans contender, and the statement gets a lot louder. Because Le Mans is not a car story. Le Mans is 24 hours of the most demanding endurance racing on Earth against factory programs with 9-figure budgets and decades of circuit knowledge. The Circuit de la Sarthe does not care about your heritage narrative or your special edition paintwork. It cares about whether your car survives the night. For Ford to bring a Mustang to that conversation, not a GT, not a purpose-built prototype wearing a Mustang badge, but something rooted in this platform, is either one of the boldest things they've done in years or a story we're all going to be watching very closely to see how it ends. And Ford has done Le Mans before, obviously. 1966 is not something you forget. And I think that history is exactly why this move is interesting rather than ridiculous, because they've proven they can show up at that race and win against the best in the world when the preparation is right and the will is there. The question is whether this is that moment or whether it's a marketing story dressed in racing colors. I genuinely don't know the answer yet, but I want to find out. Whether you think this statement is earned is a separate conversation. What I can tell you is that it commanded the space it was in. People slowed down at that car. They stopped. They took their time. Where there's a massive space of cars competing for your attention, that is not nothing. That's actually the whole point of a show car. It made people feel something. And the Le Mans angle gives it a second life beyond the show floor. A reason to keep paying attention. Ford didn't just bring a car, they opened a chapter. So I want to talk about 3 cars that earn their space here, and these are the performance cars. First, I'll start off with the Lotus Emira. I want to talk about this car because it really has no business being this good at what it does at this price. So the Amira is Lotus's last internal combustion engine car before the brand goes fully electric. And they seem to have poured everything they knew into it as a result. Standing next to one in person, the first thing that strikes you is how intentional the proportions are. Nothing about the exterior is decorative for its own sake. Every surface seems like it's doing something. The rear haunches, the way the roofline slopes, the way the front end sits lower than you expect, is coherent in a way that a lot of sports cars at this price point simply aren't. The 2026 Lotus Emira generally starts around $106,000 to $116,000 for new models, and prices have gone up to $139,000 for special editions. Either way, the Amira looks like a decision was made and then committed to all the way through. Chapman's ghost is in there. That's all I'm going to say. All right, the Porsche 911 GT3 RS. Yeah, there are cars you admire, and then there are cars that make you feel something close to embarrassed. Embarrassed at what human engineering is capable of when nobody tells it to calm down. The GT3 RS is the second kind. The wing alone is worth standing in front of for 5 minutes. Not because it's dramatic, it is, but because it's functional in a way that you can trace with your eyes. You can see from where you're standing why it's shaped the way it's shaped. The aerodynamic logic is legible. That's Porsche at its best. They don't hide the engineering, they make it beautiful and dare you to drive it. What I kept coming back to was always the interior, because for all the madness outside, the inside is almost disciplined. It says you're here to drive this, not to be distracted by it, and that's a philosophy I respect deeply. Finally, the Zenvo Aurora Agil. Zenvo is a Danish hypercar manufacturer that most people outside the enthusiast world have never heard of. The Aurora Agil is their latest, and it is genuinely difficult to describe or pronounce without reaching for words that usually mean nothing. So I'll try to be specific. The bodywork is hand-formed. You can see it, but not in a way that looks unfinished, in a way that looks alive. Like the surfaces have direction that you don't get from stamping dye or mold. The whole car reads as something that was made and not manufactured. There's a distinction there that gets lost in most automotive conversations. What it represents editorially for Throttle Culture is the other end of the spectrum from mass production. This is what happens when you apply the Lotus principle not just to weight, but to everything. Remove the volume, remove the scalability, make fewer better. That conversation is coming for this industry, whether it's ready or not. All right, let's get into pickup trucks and what they actually represent. I want to talk about these trucks because I think they get dismissed in the enthusiast conversation in a way that's lazy. And what I saw on the floor this year pushed back on that for me. The V6 pickup segment was well represented, and here's the thing about a modern V6 truck that doesn't get said enough. The gap between what a properly tuned V6 and a V8 actually deliver in daily use has closed dramatically. We're talking turbocharged or twin turbocharged displacement with torque curves that hit hard and early, in a package that gets meaningfully better fuel economy and in some cases out-tows its V8 sibling, depending on configuration. The spec sheet doesn't lie. What a V6 truck is in 2026 is not a compromise, but a decision. And the brands that showed up with them on the floor seemed to know that. The presentation wasn't apologetic. These weren't positioned as the entry trim you buy when you can't afford the real thing. They were positioned as capable, practical, intelligent choices for people who actually use their trucks as tools and want to do it efficiently. There's also something worth saying about what the truck segment represents culturally right now. Trucks are still the best-selling vehicles in America, have been for decades. The conversation about electrification, about the future of the industry, about what American car culture looks like going forward, it all runs through the truck segment, whether the enthusiast world acknowledges it or not. A V6 that tows your boat and fits in your garage and doesn't cost you a fortune to fuel is not a lesser truck. It's just an honest one. I spent more time in the truck section than I expected, and I'm not mad about it. All right, so what's the bigger picture? What is the show really saying in 2026? Walking the press floor this year, there's a tension you can feel if you're paying attention. It's tension between brands that showed up to say something about cars and brands that showed up to say something about themselves. Those are different projects, and you can feel the difference standing in the rooms. Volkswagen showed up for football, Ford showed up for legacy, and then raised the stakes with the Le Mans. Genesis showed up with the shooting brake and a creative officer who basically told you it's going into production. Lotus showed up to say goodbye to something. Porsche showed up because Porsche doesn't need a reason, they just execute. Zenvo showed up for the 20 people in the room who would understand exactly what they were looking at. And the truck brands showed up with something they've always had and rarely have to argue for. Utility, at scale, done honestly. I think the auto show as a format is an inflection point. The internet removed the mystery. You've already seen every reveal in your feed before you walk through the door. What the physical show still offers, and what it's going to have to lean into harder, is presence. The thing a photograph can't give you. The weight of a door, the smell of a cockpit, the way a car looks differently from every angle that no rendering captures. The cars that earned their room this year all had that. Not all of them did. That gap is going to widen. That's my press floor from the 2026 New York Auto Show. 7 acts, one take on where the industry is, and one woman with a lanyard and a lot of opinions. that's the show. If you want to see the visual content from this episode, the walk around footage, the booth activations, and the close ups, it's all on YouTube and Instagram. Links in the show notes. And if this episode was worth something to you, share it with someone who gets it. That's the entire growth strategy for an independent show like this one. And I mean that sincerely. I appreciate you being here. I'm Jay. This is Throttle Culture. We'll see you next week.